This is the Weather Lounge here at WeatherWorks.
Well, hello, friends. I'm back in the Weather Lounge with you. I'm meteorologist Michael Prianti in for Brad Miller. We come to you from our WeatherWorks headquarters here in Hackettstown, New Jersey. And joining me, as always, is the magnificent and tornado-loving co-host, meteorologist Mike Mahalik. How'd I do, Mike?
That's pretty good. I mean, usually Brad has some sort of quirky adjective to give me also, so I'm glad that you're keeping up the same idea as we go through here. But yeah, good to be here, Mike, and I guess it's the Mike and Mike show, is what we're doing today.
Let's rename the podcast, Mike. Let's forget the Weather Lounge. It's the Mike and
Ooh,
Mike podcast.
might have a
How's that?
problem with ESPN radio on that one, I believe.
Probably,
So.
yeah. Oh, man. But we have a great episode, Mike. I mean, this is probably one of the most interesting podcast episodes we've done so far this year, and I'm really excited about it. I'm sure our audience will love hearing about it, too.
Absolutely, that's for sure. I mean, if you're a lover of weather-related movies, this one's for you. Kind of along the lines of the movie classics that we've seen as in Twister and The Perfect Storm. And we did actually a show about that. Back I don't know how many episodes ago, Mike, that was, but
it was a while.
but it
Yeah,
was
it was a while.
fact versus fiction. How accurate is the weather in the movies? So it's going to be interesting because that's what we're going to be kind of talking about today a lot.
Exactly. And, that episode was great that we recorded, and we talked all about, different weather movies across the spectrum. And now we're going to be talking about a brand new movie that just came out, Mike.
Right, absolutely. And that movie is called Supercell. And today we have the director and screenwriter of that movie, Herbert James Winterstern. He's with us on the program. He's done over 200 film campaigns for multiple brands like Intel and Doritos. And he also was involved with the NBC primetime drama series. So we'll be talking with him and all about his new movie, Supercell, after this short break. Don't go away. And we're back. Before the break, we mentioned that we have a special guest joining us on the Weather Lounge today. His name is Herbert James Winterstern. He's the director and filmmaker of a brand new movie called Supercell, which is out in theaters, digital, and streaming today. So, Herbert, thanks so much for joining us in the Weather Lounge to talk about your new movie, all about weather, because we love weather here.
Mike and Mike, thanks for having me, guys. I'm really excited to talk about the movie, but not only with anybody, with people who understand weather nuts like you, weather nuts like me, and weather nuts that are listening in right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So glad to have you on. And I guess, first of all, I know we have your full name there, but what's best to call you by here, Herbert James?
You can call me Jamie.
Great.
It's my full name is Herbert James Winterstern, but my friends and people who know me call me Jamie.
Okay, we'll consider ourselves friends here for today on the
Great.
podcast.
Friend of the Weather Lounge, so that's great.
Yeah, I mean, hey, we want to keep it light. We want to keep it fun. So, I like Jamie a whole lot better. So let's go with that.
Okay.
So Jamie, why don't you give us a little background here? Becoming a filmmaker and producer. I mean, what made you try to go in this direction and obviously succeed?
I think when I think back to when I was a kid, I would remember watching movies with my dad. I might have been 7, 8 years old. My mom would put me to bed, and I would hear noise coming from the basement, and I always sneak in. After my mom went to sleep, I would sneak downstairs. I found my dad on a couch. His hand was in popcorn, another hand had a Diet Coke, and he was watching, movies I remember watching with him. Remember, I'm 8 years old. Charlton Heston's Planet of the Apes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I even think I watched Schindler's List by age 12. So, I mean, I was watching movies far beyond my years at a very early age, but I just took to it. And I've always, my mother had a camcorder doing home videos my whole life. I was watching her do that. And eventually I took control of the camcorder and I started making my own little short home videos.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody kind of had some experience with that, with having their parents take films. I mean, I know there's a lot of bad old home movies, and, and I know you took it to a much higher level. That's for sure. Maybe that's just, like you said, you got a hold of that camera, you wanted to start shooting, and there's from there it just kind of expanded, huh?
Well, that's just a starting point, and I feel like a lot of people, hobbyists, they get into it. But what stuck, I guess, was I don't know. I got a knack for just filming things, finding interesting angles, and then it didn't
Yeah.
stop there. I enjoyed cutting the imagery together on at the time it was Final Cut, before it was Avid, Premiere now, and then also like cutting it to music and letting music decipher the storytelling. So, I just kept building on the craft of, I guess, what it was filmmaking. And then eventually I was able to pursue it more heavily in film school.
Wow, wow. And like your thought, how you actually became, of the filmmaker and what actually led you to getting that inspiration reminds me of like when I started to become interested in meteorology because, I would always watch the Weather Channel when I was younger and I would always, sit in front of the TV screen, probably too close to the TV, which is probably why I have to wear contacts now. But I was 3 or 4 years old, and at the same time, people my age were watching cartoons. I mean, I watch cartoons, but I also
Yeah.
watch the Weather Channel probably way more than a lot of other people. So it's like that one spark that got me interested. And I feel like for you is kind of the same thing.
It's funny because I, just like you, would record the Weather Channel during pretty big events. I remember, and I was obsessed with weather too. My family were from Montreal, Canada, so we would spend a lot
Okay.
of time like snowbirds going down to Florida. So my interaction with I guess you would call severe weather or storms in general was the lightning you'd see over the Florida ocean. And whether it was filming WSVN 7, I think that's the station down there. What not filming, sorry, recording their
Right.
newscasts of hurricane landfalls, or Jim Cantori standing in front of some heavy breeze, or I was always fascinated with weather events. I remember in 1998 we had the worst ice storm to hit Montreal. I was off school for two
Mm.
weeks. That was great, but I was just fascinated with how a storm could cover everything in 3 inches of ice. And I was able really to find a way to get two passions of mine, filmmaking and weather, and kind of combine them after 37, 38 years of life.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that event. Well, I don't remember it from a firsthand forecasting standpoint, but I know I've seen videos on YouTube of that event and how much ice was on the trees, and how everything was snapping, and you'd
Mhm.
hear the branches, and you see the power lines, and it was an amazing storm. I think that was one of the biggest ice storms that I can ever remember, honestly, in my lifetime.
Well, I will say that 1998, I was 13 years old. I forget what grade that is. But my mom, to her credit,
Oh,
wanted to find a way, even though school, I think, called or blasted us that we were uh,
oh no.
canceled. She had to try and get us to school that day. And thanks to her, uh, the drive to school, which was about a 15-minute drive, that took an hour and a half. But I got to see all of the damage that the ice did to Montreal. And it just, I got to experience the ice storm thanks to her trying to drive us to school that day.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
I mean, with you so interested in weather, I gotta imagine that's what kind of made you explore this new severe weather aspect of your filmmaking career, with Supercell, right?
Yeah, well, the thing is, the filmmaking journey, I mean, I like to say it's about failures, right? It's,
Mm,
obviously the
sure.
dream, you see a lot of predecessors. Steven Spielberg, who probably is, he's the Bill Gates in filmmaking. He's the Steve Jobs. He's a genius. He's a savant. There's no one else that's ever going to be like him. So you see someone like him, direct Jaws at 27 years old. I mean, that's just not something that you can achieve today. So there is that pressure. I'm turning 30 at the time. I'm 35, 36. I did a show for NBC at 28, and now I'm directing commercials. But I always wanted to make a movie. Movie was the thing. But what I never had was a story to tell. And it wasn't until I went storm chasing in 2019 with my fiance, just for the fun and love of tornado chasing, because I've never done it before. I thought the storms in Florida were big and immaculate and the lightning was pure, but I was mistaken when I went to West Texas in April, because I saw my first Supercell with her and I was blown away. And at that moment I was addicted. At that point I said to myself, I'm going to go storm chasing every year, because it is the most breathtaking experience to see the supercells to the naked eye. What I couldn't believe is, to the naked eye, you could see the structures of the cloud rotating. And I had my camera with me, and I was just taking photographs and filming it as a fan. Little did I know, a month later when I got the idea, why haven't we seen a movie about storm chasers since 1996? Well, I'm going to go ahead and write that. That was the seed.
Right.
Wow.
I mean, I wish I had the chance to go storm chasing. Look, I do it nonchalantly around my area in Pennsylvania, but that really doesn't lend to storm chasing very well with all the hills around and trees and things like that. Where out in the plains, you have that big, majestic look at the horizon, and you can see the entire structure of the storm. Whereas I'm just kind of getting the top of it when I'm looking around in my area. But I have seen supercells in the region, and you're absolutely right. You can see the structure rotating. Especially one time I remember specifically where I actually saw the wall cloud on the bottom, and you could see how rapidly the clouds are wrapping around the base of the thunderstorm. And I was saying to myself, and the tornado warnings are going out and everything, and I was safe because that was gone, long gone where I was, but I was watching the backside of it. But I was so angry because I couldn't see the base all the way to the ground. So all I saw was the top structure. I couldn't see if there was any funnel from it, and I was just trying to get around the hills, but I never quite managed to. So it must have been fantastic for you, Jamie, to see that entire site of the storm.
I was very lucky, So how the story goes is, I'm looking. First off, I've never done it before, so I go on Google and I type in storm chasing, and all these tour companies come up. And one of the
Wow.
first tour companies that came up is Tempest Tours. Now, Tempest Tours, they're a pretty reputable company. I think there's a few of them, and they're based out of Arlington. And I knew that the severe weather event was happening in West Texas. Now, but I also noticed that it was pretty pricey to go on a tour with them. I think it was around $3,000 to go on a 10-day trip. I didn't want to
Wow.
make the
That's a lot of
commitment.
money. Yeah.
So, I cold called them, and I spoke to a lovely woman named Kim George, who I guess runs customer service there. And I was very honest with her. I said, look, I would love to do your tour. I can't afford it. I am going to go down there. So do you have any advice so that I don't kill myself? And she was very sweet. She didn't turn me down. She said, if you're going to be in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, contact my husband, Steve George. He's a geologist, but he has an office, and he knows everything about storm chasing. So I go to this man's office when my fiance and I land in Fort Worth. And granted, the next day is the severe weather day. That's when the Outlook has an enhanced warning for West Texas. Maybe it was a slight risk. I don't remember. But I show up to his office. I know nothing. I don't have radar scope. I don't know what the HUR is or the NAM nest. And for 2 hours, this man, talk about Southern hospitality. He is so sweet to us. He explains not only like what the HUR is, he shows us a little dot on Ozona, near Ozona and Iran, Texas. He's like, at 3 p.m., be here the next day. And sure enough, the following day, I was like, I don't know what to believe. This seems a little too good to be true. You can look at forecast models and they're actually that accurate. We were there,
Hmm.
and I tell you, one of the most photogenic, isolated supercells. It was beginner's luck. Eyewitness. I was driving through the Cap Rock in West Texas, and then, as you know, the canyons opened up, and you saw this
Hmm.
big vista, and this atomic bomb cloud was just staring at me, and I was like, "Oh my god!" It was a Jurassic Park moment, like going through the gates, and that was
Right.
the
Yeah.
beginning of my experience.
Wow, and that reminds me of a scene in the movie actually, and I guess that's kind of where that it wasn't that drew inspiration from when they're actually driving around that big kind of rock face, and then I
Hmm.
think Alec Baldwin's character is saying to look around the edge. You'll get it. Get your cameras ready, and you just see it,
Mhm.
and it's crazy that moment. You don't really feel like you're in the moment until you actually see the structure in front of you, and that it kind of brought me like I was there in that scene. I've never seen a supercell in person. I've never seen a storm like that. I've never actually seen a live tornado, unfortunately, but that just brought me down to that scene. It was just amazing.
It was, let me tell you, I mean, it was really tough to recreate it, and that's the tough thing is there's so much inspiration by seeing it in real life. And,
Hmm.
think about producing a movie like this, especially at a low budget. You really have to cobble these things together. Now, to talk about kind of the sausage, how it was made, right? How do we recreate a moment like that I witnessed, a year earlier? And that's where you got to kind of stitch things together. And the canyon that we ended up shooting was a canyon I drove it through in Palm Springs to get that front plate. And then, of course, I worked closely with Pecos Hank. I don't know if you're familiar with Pecos Hank. He's a big storm
Yes.
chaser YouTuber, but he was a big partner with me. He gave me his whole library of storm footage, and I was able to find a really nice wide shot of very an isolated anvil structure,
Yeah.
supercell to put inside of that canyon. So, it was a challenge, but we found a way to make it work.
Yeah, and I think that's what made the movie really great is that you used a lot of actual live shots, and that's something that I don't think a lot of past weather movies really used. It was a
Mm.
lot more of just like kind of a lot of fake CGI, and it made like the tornadoes, like especially in the one of the movies, Into the Storm, used a lot of fake CGI tornadoes, and it just kind of looked like someone made it in front of a computer. But you see what you see in the movie is all real, all the shots of the tornado kind of making touchdown. That's all real.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the funny thing is the lack of funds that we had forced us to be more realistic. It's
Hmm.
kind of well, it's an excuse because if you have unlimited resources and VFX budget,
Right.
then you tend to go down the route of, oh, we'll just create it with CGI. But there's the problem, right? Because and this is a little bit more of a philosophical conversation about filmmaking. Movies back in the 90s, they didn't have as much CGI. They just started the advent of computer graphics, right? Twister was one of the first movies to enjoy ILM's fluid motion and all that. And the thing about those movies was VFX and CGI was a supplement to the story. So you only got it when you needed it. Whereas today you watch a
Mm.
lot of Marvel movies or you watch a lot of Roland Emmerich movies, you see Into the Storm. It's just over the top, over stimulation. It's numbing. And I think with Supercell, I made a decision where it's like, one, we can't afford to go CGI. So we're going to try and go as practical as possible with Ritter fans that can blow 60 mile per hour, rain machines and dust particles, and create chaos in the frame. One that's real. So there'll be no substitute for it. And then when we do cut to the sky, well, I can't afford to do CGI, and I don't want to. So
Mm.
I'm very
Mhm.
lucky. I meet these filmmakers. There's a ton of them. Martin Licious, who runs Tempest Tours, he's another great storm chasing filmmaker. There's all this beautiful footage that's been captured. Use that, comp it into the backplate of these big shots, and then you have a very authentic experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, with the movie, I did notice that a lot where, there was, the physical. like wind blowing by the characters, and I was thinking to myself, how did they create this? How did they create all this wind and dust and everything? And how did they create the big hailstones hitting the van of the tour company there? Um, I was just curious, with the cracking glass and everything like that.
Well,
Was
yeah, it was, well, the hailstorm was fun. I mean, it was a little mixture. I mean, I will admit that VFX played a big component in that, and there are some shots that are a little bit more heavily involved because we didn't have the time to safely break glass on set, especially with actors in the van. That's a pretty big stunt. But there were a lot of elements that we shot where, if there's these very fantastic ice cube balls that you can buy the molds for.
Yeah.
Before
Okay.
that day, I went and we bought, like, I don't know, maybe 2 dozen of those molds, and we were filling them up with water, and we had a fridge not too far away from set, and then we basically filled these buckets with what were 2-inch balls of ice. Now they were kind of too perfectly like symmetrical and like
Mhm.
cylinders, right? Because hailstones are
Mm.
very imperfect, but it was a mixture. I think on set during some of the wide shots, we used some styrofoam torn balls that we laid out on the grass, and then with some dry
Mhm.
ice and some liquid nitrogen, we were able to get some hail fog going on. So it
Mm.
was like a mixture of techniques to create the illusion.
Wow.
I mean, it certainly looked very realistic from when I was watching the pre-screening. I was that part with the hailstones. I was like, there's really people getting smashed inside this van right
Oh,
now, from
well,
what I
you
could
reminded
see.
me. You reminded me actually because yeah, there is the where the glass blows into the van.
Yeah, it blows in the wind.
Yeah, yeah. Though that was we had rubber. So there's this great like safe glass. They're not even glass. It's rubber clear gelatin like
Hmm.
pebbles. And on
Mm.
action, we were able to like have them chuck all that rubber into the faces of the extras. But
Oh,
Oh
on
wow.
camera,
Okay.
it looks like actual glass. And then you have
right.
water and wind and so yeah, there's trust me, special effects. They've been doing this since the dawn of cinema. They have all these fun, safe measures to make it look real.
Well,
Yeah.
that's what I was thinking to myself. There has to be a way that we're not putting these actors in harm's way,
Right.
with actual glass shards coming through the window. And I was thinking to myself, there's got to be something here. And even with getting the actors in the scenes where they look like they're close to these thunderstorms, I was thinking to myself, are we really going to put a high profile actor in this situation? I don't know.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to me on how that was all pieced together and done.
Well, listen, I'll it it was a 20-day shoot, right? So that this was pretty a quick experience. But trust me, there is an alternate universe where a movie that it comes to my mind where I think they really benefited with doing it let's say avant-garde, but naturalistically, where they had the actors go through the Midwest plains was No Man Land. Now, this is
Mm.
another movie that has nothing to do with weather, and it's probably a lot easier to have Francis McDermott traveling with a caravan through the Midwest, shooting during actual sunsets and whatnot. I guess this whole prelude is of the story is me saying I would have loved for Alec and Anne and Skeet to come into a van during storm season and then we go chasing and then the storms are blossoming. Okay, guys, we're gonna do scene 42 right now. Ready? That would be a dream, but you can't do that. Maybe one day down the
Oh,
road we'll do something more naturalistically.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, either way, I was considering you said a few times that there was a quite a tight budget on the film, but I was impressed that you had actors like Alec and Anne and stuff like that in the film. I was like, wow, this is fantastic. That we have this high level or high profile actors in this Supercell storm or film all about meteorology. I was kind of like, hey, all right, great.
You know, people, I think people, everybody has a connection to weather. I don't care who
Mm,
you are or what you do. We all relate to weather. And, you know, I don't think even if you're Alec Baldwin or Anne Heche, a good story is a good story. You know, for me, the meteorology component was huge. And I know the spectacle of tornadoes is very sellable, but my mission was to tell a personal story, something about parents, about my relationship to my parents. I went through losing my parent. And I think that that was kind of what drew the interest of the cast. And if I was able to achieve that type of connection, then the movie could be that much more appreciated for the spectacles, right? That you know they have that has more meaning to it. So and that's what was so good about Twister in a way because you know just to think back to that film. You know, of course, they had a huge budget and they had unbelievable
mm,
spectacle, but the characters, right? The characters were great, and again more philosophical on filmmaking or the way the industry has gone. And I feel like we're losing touch with good stories, original stories about real people. You know, people that we can look up to, like meteorologists. Why can't we look up to meteorologists as heroes? You know, you tell me.
I love that. I mean, I don't see myself as a hero personally. I don't have a cape, and I'm not, swinging into action, saving the day.
yeah.
But it's great that you have that mentality that sometimes like the hardworking meteorologists, who are the people that are warning everyone to get out of the way. The National Weather Service does a great job with warnings, and we've gotten so more accurate, so to speak, in the past 30 years of detecting tornadoes, warning people.
Mm.
I mean, you look back 40 years ago, and the stuff that we now know comparatively is pretty crazy.
Yeah, I would agree. It's amazing. When you said heroes, I never felt myself in in that kind of vein either. But when you talk to some of our clients here at our company at WeatherWorks, a lot of times, yeah, it's the little things that make the difference. So it's, hey, this snow squall is going to happen that nobody really knew about, but I'm letting you know, I'm calling you a half hour before this is going to hit you so that you know about it. And then all of a sudden, you know, these guys will call back later and say, thanks so much. Nobody knew about this and you guys let me know. That saved me so much money and grief in the long run that you don't even realize. So um, I guess we are heroes, Mike.
That's great. I'm great. That's awesome.
Um, but Jamie, I was going to ask you the meteorology aspect of the film. Was that something you did a lot of research into yourself, or did you have a team of experts to kind of get things right with regards to the terminology used and the modeling used, even some of the laptop shots? I know there was the Next Lab from College of DuPage, and I personally use that myself, as do a lot of our meteorologists here at our company.
Yeah, you know, it was kind of a growing communal experience, right? So it starts off with me chasing and making my contact and connections with Tempest Tours, you know, Martin Licious, Kim George, and then, you know, me attending the TESSA conference. And if you don't know what the TESSA conference is, it's the Texas Severe Storm Association conference. They do it once every 2 years. It's a nonprofit type of deal down there. And they basically have National Weather Service forecasters like Roger Edwards and some other pretty famous forecasters from the National Weather Service and NOAA. They come down and they speak about storm chasing. And I educated myself and I took every moment as an opportunity to talk to a new professional. Dr. Lee Orff was someone I sought out of. I sought for. I saw his crazy 3D models that he built of supercells that hopefully will advance forecasting. I think he did one of El Reno. Through him, he's the reason I met Pecos Hank, who's the big YouTuber that's been doing this for 20 years. Skip Talbot, um, Val and Amy Castor with Channel 9 in Oklahoma City. They, I had them chaperone us on second unit so we'd be safe. And they were the ones that drove us to the storms. And I actually put a camera on their car and they became a camera vehicle, giving us some of those pretty prolific shots of the van driving through the plains. So it was a very communal experience. It was a David Hoadley. I don't know if you recognize that name. He's a famous illustrator for Storm Track magazine. He did all the illustrations in the 70s and 80s, back when Storm Geeks, all they had was this magazine called Storm Track, and that was a way to like get updates on anything before the internet. So it was just a fun like Easter egg communal thing where it was almost like a game. It's like, how realistic can I make this? How much can I involve the community to make it feel like I'm making a movie for them? That was it. Just turned into that, I think.
Right. And I mean, I think they kind of hit the nail on the head there. I mean, you kind of put so much of the meteorology into this movie. I mean, there were times where I'm trying to think of like, because we had the episode talking about the facts and fiction of weather movies, and obviously sometimes when you have a higher budget in a movie like Twister, sometimes the blend between reality and fiction sometimes blends, and you kind of can't really tell. But in this movie, it felt real. There were a lot of scenes that felt real, and if you watch like when you're driving down the highway and you see the supercell coming at you, or you're trying to run away from it, these are things that real storm chasers have to deal with. Not getting caught in the bear's cage, so to speak. These are all real things, and it kind of brings the movie together, and it really shows how these storm chasers really react in these situations. So it really brings that out.
Thank you. Yeah, it was. I remember there were different episodes of going through the scripting process where we were a month out from shooting, and I remember I went back to another Tessa conference with the screenplay, and I worked through the scenarios with Martin Licious, and in Act 3, right? Like the scenario would be, well, what if there's a big weather event in southeast Nebraska and these
Mhm.
supercells developed, and then you think it's over, but then there's a second round storm that comes, and there's this whole concept of back building where it cycles, and that was
Yep.
something. Listen, I couldn't get everything right. I didn't shoot this obviously in southeast Nebraska. I didn't go to McCook for this, and a lot of it was shot in Montana, and then wherever we could shoot it in Texas, Oklahoma. So if you look carefully, you're going to see street signs that you don't want to see. It might say like Interstate 10, and that makes no sense. Or you think they're going to Nebraska, but they're exiting Texas. But there was the few moments of like having the Dorothy statue in there was exciting for me. In Liberal, Kansas, they have the Wizard of Oz Museum. So doing all these little callbacks were a lot of fun, and yeah, keeping it as accurate, but also still, this movie is really 95% going to be for people who don't understand meteorology. So I have to also be present in thinking I can't get too complicated. So it was a little bit of a balance of spoon feeding enough where I can educate
Mm-hmm.
a layman on meteorology while also engaging the meteorologists.
Right. Right.
No, I appreciated from a meteorologist standpoint, I appreciated the callbacks to the certain models being used, and talking about CAPE in the one scene when they were in a motel room, and about 1,000 CAPE usually gets you some thunderstorms, especially if you have something to trigger it, and then if we get up to 4,000 or more, or whatever it was, that is a very extreme case. And I was appreciative of it. It wasn't just, oh, here comes that big tornado, smash bang, and look at all this going on, all this debris, everything flying. It wasn't. I appreciated those little nuances of the actual science that goes behind those forecasts, and where what they're thinking and where they need to be in the right spot, and that's what it takes to see these storms that they really want to see.
So one thing I wanted to mention, and this goes back to the beginning of the movie, kind of tying with Twister. I noticed there was one scene where the character, I think Bill Brody's son, is typing on the computer, looking up his father's legacy, and he types in Bill, and for a split second, Bill Paxton comes up
Jackson, yeah.
in the search, and I thought that was a great nod to Bill Paxton, and Twister, and just I thought that was really great. Just for a split second, if you noticed, if you pause the movie, that was a great nod to that.
Thank you. That was
So,
intentional.
of course.
Everybody loves a little Easter egg in
I
their
love the Easter
movies.
eggs in
Yeah.
movies. I've been trying to find so many, and I had a list. I was like writing it out. Oh, there's that, and there's that, and there's that. As the weather weenie in me trying to look up all these things in the movie. So that was one thing that I picked up immediately, and then I was like, wow, look at that, for a split second. So
So, so Jamie, one thing I was interested in was the underwater tornado escape at the end. I was thinking to
Mhm.
myself, I haven't thought of that in the past. I didn't know if there was any documentation on somebody doing this or that you built off of, or if it was just something that you imagined up. I was curious about that.
So it's interesting. I remember in the writing sessions with my co-writer Annie, and we had another friend there who went to film school with us. His name's Michael Corbel. I'll give him credit for the idea because we were
Mm,
trying to, we had pretty much the entire story mapped out, but we wanted like a pretty unique, original end piece to the whole thing.
mm.
And he came up again. His name's Michael Corbel. He went to film school with us. He's like, well, what if they went into a pool? And I said, you know what? That's not a terrible idea. Like, has it been myth busted or something? And I looked it up. And listen, let's do research. It's probably not a great idea because one, debris goes in the pool and debris is heavy and you're still going to get probably crushed. And trust me, if you type in pool and tornado, you're going to see a lot of terrible looking scenes where the pool's just riddled with debris and cars. And it's probably not a good idea. But you know what I said? It's a movie. Let's have a little
Yeah.
suspense and disbelief. And that one I think is more myth and fictitious than until proven otherwise. I don't know.
Well, it made me think,
yeah.
from my standpoint, I'm thinking to myself, well, would that be safe? Well, obviously the truck falls into the pool. So, so that's not a safe place to be in. Um, but I would think, Mike, if you think about this a minute, if you were deep enough,
You probably
it
could.
might be plausible because, all the winds would be on the surface. I don't know how much actually would get kind of sucked
I think
into
you
the
would have to do
tornado.
an experiment in
Yeah.
some sort of controlled environment, or maybe just like I don't know, have a big pool set up in the middle of Kansas and hope that a tornado runs through it and see like how much water gets kind of pulled out of the pool. But hey, you know what? I mean, that's kind of maybe a future test down the road for some of these storm chasers. But yeah, one thing I wanted to mention, there's a scene where they actually leave Bill Brody in the phone booth, or he goes and runs into the phone booth, I should say,
Yeah,
because they
William.
leave William Brody, yes. They leave they leave him aside,
Mhm.
and he gets trapped in the phone booth. And I thought that was a great scene because the tornado basically passes right over, and you can kind of see like he's like huddling in fear, hoping that the tornado doesn't just like suck him out of the phone booth. How did you film that, and what was the inspiration to actually get that scene?
That scene was out of necessity. So originally in the script, it was more of a Joplin style convenience store scene where everyone rushes into the convenience store. And I believe there's a famous iPhone footage, smartphone footage. I think it was from Joplin in 2011. You guys I may get the facts wrong on that, but it
Okay.
was supposed to be William stays in the convenience store and they survive it by being on the inside of like the beer coolers. And
Mhm.
that just turned into a very expensive scene. More people, more extras, more damage, more scope to show more things falling down. And it just, this movie was so tight on money. You had to find different ways to cut things in order to just be able to tell the story. So I was like, well, what if there was a phone booth? Well, then I have literally a 3 by 3 foot set that I can control. That's brilliant because I can control that. This doesn't must not cost anything. So the inspiration for that moment was really out of necessity that we needed to keep it contained. But once we got the phone booth, I mean, the phone booth is very special to me. I don't know if you know this, but Spielberg's first movie is called Duel. And in that
Hmm.
movie, it's about a truck driver that's chasing a civilian, and it's really like man versus beast. We never see the truck driver, but he's like this indomitable
Oh.
force.
Is that where there's like not much dialogue at all? It's just that's all that's going on the entire time? Oh, I know
Yeah, it's
exactly
it's
what
just
movie you're
this.
talking about.
It's a cathartic movie. It really is a Spielberg movie because it's really man versus beast, and there's a sequence where the main character he's going into a phone booth to call the police, and it's almost like we replicated it. It's the same green looking phone booth that they have in that film with the
Oh
with
wow.
the um with the flags, with the colorful flags. And in that scene, the truck drives right into the phone booth. He has to jump out of the phone booth to not get run over. But I always thought, like, the phone booth is so archaic because nobody uses that anymore. It's
Hmm.
symbolic of kind of past technology. And the only places I see phone booths still are kind of in the Midwest. Well, obviously, they don't work. I mean, that sound effect where there was a dial tone, that might be not really believable, but it was fun because for a kid who's 17 years old, he thinks it's a shelter. What does he know from a shelter to a phone booth?
Mhm.
Of course, he realizes when it's too late. But that's kind of the story behind the phone booth.
Wow. I thought it was a great scene though. I mean, for you saying you had to switch to this scene, I know it was kind of to for the budget wise, but I think it worked. Honestly, it probably would have worked way better than if you were in the beer cooler because it shows you the raw power of the storm and how like all the nails and everything coming loose from the phone booth and everything kind of almost it was like it was right about to get destroyed, and he just managed to just at the nick of time to just be able to the storm went by and he didn't get harmed. So it was amazing, amazing scene.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing that I would want to touch on is the actual scientific instrumentation about the radio waves or the was it infrasonic detection that we're talking about? Mike, I think you might have looked this up a little bit
Yeah,
to see what that was about.
so I'm curious to get your take, Jamie, because I was actually I had to do some research and look through and see, like because I thought at the beginning of the movie when I saw this like contraption, I thought, okay, is this based on some sort of real like I did not know anything about it, and then I actually looked through and there's actually some studies and some I guess papers that have been done about infrasonic detection of tornado genesis, like the formation of a tornado based on infrasonic waves. So can you talk a little bit how that you got into that? Was it from the Tesla conference or what?
Well, it was a bunch of research. So initially, technology. I mean, we think back to Twister, right? Probes being put in front of the funnel. Hopefully, the funnel hits the probes. Probes go up into the funnel, and then data is recorded. And I mean that was pretty much implemented. And think about one of the most prolific storm chasers, which was also a big inspiration for me in Tim Samaras, right, and Carl Jung, Paul
Mhm.
Samaras' son, which tragically, they were killed in the 2013 El Reno storm. Um,
Hmm.
there was a lot. I did research that man's life because he to me was one of the most heroic meteorologists out there. He lost his life. He gave his life
Mhm.
for this practice, for this business. And for me, there's that element of him almost like this cowboy in the Midwest. He put his life on the line, and it cost him his life. And I know that he was a brilliant engineer, and that probes he was really focused on these really interesting probes that were kind of like this. they had this like triangular shape to them so that they would remain
Hmm.
on the ground and wouldn't fly out,
Hmm.
fly into the air. So I think I took that inspiration of, okay, well, that was technology that kind of led us to about 2013. What's the latest technology that they're doing that advances storm forecasting and science? And that's when, through I think Val Castor introduced me to Dr. Elbing, out of OSU. And this
Hmm.
gentleman, he's PhD. He studies how infrasound, how the vibrations of the ground create this infrasonic sound that could be picked up from 10, 50 miles away. Because when that tornado starts to grind on the surface of the earth, it causes frequency shock, a wave.
Hmm.
And so Val Castor actually had a device. It wasn't as ghostbustery as the one that William uses, and it wasn't as per se like as simple as plugging in headphones. Again, it's a movie, we took liberties, but the science behind it came from Dr. Elbing, and how infrasound is now being used to track tornado genesis.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've heard of that in the past, and it's great to learn new things about what's on the cutting edge of the storm chasing community and the tornado research. Um, I don't know, Mike. I might have to go out and do some storm chasing.
I've always
You
Keep
wanted
a
to
guys
do
got
it.
to come
bucket list,
out.
right? You know.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of that here on the East Coast. It's just too many hills and too many trees.
Too
Not a lot
many
of flat
snowstorms.
and too many snowstorms. That's true. Yeah.
I know the listeners won't be able to see that, but it's pretty close now.
Uh-oh.
Wow.
Yeah, that
It's
looks
a
like
little
a decent
severe.
storm right there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a little bit of
Maybe some
a
rotation with
little,
it.
It looks like it's
yeah,
trying to get a hook
maybe
going.
a little hook,
Wow.
maybe we'll see.
Perfect timing for our podcast, I will say.
I know.
Absolutely. Well, Jamie, why don't you just give the listeners a little plug about the movie, where you can find it, and basically anything you want to say about it.
Yeah, so it's available March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, which is tomorrow, on demand and on digital, basically with Apple TV or Roku or iTunes. You can rent or purchase the movie. Also, it's in select theaters. If you want to know where you can see it on the big screen, which, by the way, it was built for the big screen. So I really highly recommend, if you're in a town that has it showing over the next week, go see it. There's a list of theaters at supercellmovie.com. And I really hope you guys enjoy it and talk about it, share it with your friends, because it's really for the weather community. Hopefully, it'll inspire new meteorologists to come.
Right. And we'll put all the links in the show notes for everyone that's listening to the podcast, so you know where to go to find the movie if you have to. So
All right, Jamie. Well, I really do appreciate you coming out on the Weather Lounge podcast. Thanks a lot. It's been really a good time talking.
yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Mike and Mike. It was a pleasure.
All right, and that's it for the Weather Lounge episode this week. Join us every 2 weeks for a new episode. And you can also find information on weatherworksinc.com about our company, WeatherWorks, and all the social media channels out there. Just search for WeatherWorks, you can find us. But that is it for our show. So until next time, we'll see you then.